Hello everyone, this is one of our first lectures that will introduce us now slowly to assignment 2. Now you all have received this PowerPoint, and I would like to just produce a very brief discussion about this PowerPoint and its purpose. So you might have actually scrolled through the slides and gotten the idea, but one of the things I want you to understand is how complex the brain is. So very often you will find out that people go to schools and the Department of Education will be talking about things like evidence-based learning, and what they mean by this is something else than what I'm talking about. Right? It's the same wording, but what they are saying is basically, does it work? Does it work? They have a question, does it work? But the problem often is, what's the it? And how is the it relating to the curriculum? So without going too far into the depths of the meanings of all of these words, I would like to make a case to you, or put the case forward to you, that before we actually do anything with students and before we start making conclusions, whether things work or not, we need to actually understand the process of learning. And in order to understand the process of learning, we need to actually understand how complex the brain is. Some of you already probably have a pretty good idea about it, and if you scroll through these slides you probably already have some insights, but the key is that the brain is not a camera. Camera was already created by a human being for a human being. So you can imagine that a dog would create a different camera, an ant will create a different camera, because each of them actually organizes and perceives information differently. So the camera actually doesn't capture the world. The camera actually captures information that we have programmed the camera for, because that's how we see the world. We created a camera to capture the things that we see, not the things that are. And now if would like you to actually understand and appreciate that slight distinction. And it is very, very important, because the way the world are, nobody knows how things are. And the scientists talk about the theory of everything, and they talk about all kinds of things, and unless you actually have a thorough or at least some sort of experience in listening to the scientists and to their methodology, you actually cannot claim that scientific methodology is crystal clear and everything what we are learning is about the reality as it is. No self-respecting scientists would say that they actually describe reality as it is, right? They describe reality as they see it, as they understand it, as it works for them to get the rocket into the moon or to put a satellite in its orbit. So things are very complicated. Okay, so now I will just take you through this slide and through this PowerPoint, and I hope it will take me only like 5 to 10 minutes. I want to rush in order to just make one single point, actually 2 points. So the first point is, let us look at this brain that we had here. So this is a brain about literacy. This brain is about language learning and literacy. And you would think, oh my God, this is really good, right? And it is. This reference is probably from, I don't know, I had this picture for quite a while, but this is from, I don't know. I can't remember anymore where this picture is from, but I just got it. So you can actually Google it, and you can probably get a pretty good idea where I drew it from. I think I drew it from from a movie by a neuroscientist who created this program, Fast Forward, but I'm not quite sure actually at this very moment anymore. Point is, if you see at the top we have kindergarten and the brain, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So that's the child at about 5 years, which is about 5 years old. So the left hemisphere, you can see where the green arrows are. There is nothing, there's no information there. Well, obviously there are some things there, but what is missing is actually those red dots that you can see on the right. So we have some red dots in the right hand hemisphere, but we don't have those red dots yet in the left hand hemisphere. And why is that? Because all the language of a 5-year-old is in the right hand hemisphere. And what that means, that a 5-year-old can tell you a joke, can laugh with you, can do all kinds of complex things with language. But one thing a 5-year-old yet doesn't do, or at least in our culture, most of 5-year-olds don't do, they don't write as yet and read. So what happens is that those things we have in the right hand hemisphere are not yet translated into abstract symbols in the left hand hemisphere. So you can imagine that as a teacher, your task would be to get those red dots in the right hand hemisphere have some form of linkage or representation also in the left hand hemisphere. So how do you do it? Well, how do you do it is actually least interesting. Most interesting question is how not to do, how not to do it, or if you get the point, right? We don't really necessarily need to know how to do it, but we need to know what not to do. And most of this PowerPoint is actually about it's a kind of a balance about you learning what you should not be doing, and also therefore learning what kinds of things are preferential. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you have a 5-year-old who has in the right hand hemisphere red dots and can use language, in order for a 5-year-old now to develop those red dots in the left hand hemisphere to be able actually to read and write, you need to use the things that the 5-year-old already can do, right? So you don't take a 5-year-old and you don't put in front of them A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Because he doesn't know what it is. Well, even if they do, because you will introduce them to it, what you are also doing with A, B, C, D, E, F, G per se, you are not building on their language abilities, their oral skills and comprehension skills. You're creating a new mathematical system in their head, but you do not make a link with what they already have, which is the knowledge of communication at the level of the 5-year-old. Now, this is a very critical point because as you were until now learning, and this is, as I said, we're moving now towards assignment 2. Until now, we were learning that literacy is not about reading and writing. It is about informed participation, using the tools, the literacy tools, in order to impact on others in an informed way. Right? So we weren't saying that reading and writing is about putting letters or sending out letters, putting letters on paper or sending out letters. What it is about skillful communication so that you, or not you, but you as an adult or children in school, they can use symbols and therefore use literacy in order to engage in an informed way with people, in order to have an impact, the desired impact. I call it the desired impact. And why do I call it a desired impact? As you might have actually seen throughout these lessons with me, we play to win. Every time we open our mouth, we play to win. We don't actually open our mouth in order to look like an idiot, like a fool, unless we want to. Right? If you're a comedian, now and then you actually might want to look like a fool. But then you actually still play to win. So bringing it back to where we were to begin with the slide, when we want to teach literacy to little children, we must begin with what they already know so that they can actually draw on their knowledge and use the new system they are learning, the abstract system of literacy, to support what they already know and actually the skill for which literacy symbols have been invented, which is to communicate, but now effectively. You might have seen my other lessons where I was talking about effectively, which means if you want to tell your community in the 21st century that we have a particular celebration in a school, you don't do door knocks, you send them a newsletter, right? But in order to send a newsletter, you've got to know that there is such a tool as a newsletter available. So that's powerful knowledge. And you also have to know how to actually structure a newsletter to be clear, to look in a way, but people will recognize that the newsletter has information value of a particular kind that newsletters do. So literacy is in order to serve communication. Literacy is not a system in and of itself. Uh, um, right, so that's very important. Literacy is to serve communication, and therefore, to teach literacy, we must do it in such a way that children use it, and when they actually are learning to use it, they don't use literacy for literacy's sake because it means nothing. What they use it is in order to create links, how much more they can do and how much more effective they can be with symbolic systems of literacy in order to actually communicate better and communicate in a way that actually allows them to drive the ideas and drive and obtain an impact that they actually want to achieve through their communication. So that's the point. The point is, if you want to get the left hemisphere to have the red dots, you don't do it in as a mathematical system. You teach literacy to support communication, and therefore children have or can actually link your lessons with what they already have, so they can build associations and they can see a purpose of it. If you do it as a mathematical system, you're failing. Now, why am I saying that? I'll show you why. I hope I can actually get it on the screen. I was scrolling here through different traditions in literacy teaching in order to be of use to you. And this is wonderful when and I will be talking about it later on. So this is a website about problems that children have when they actually learn literacy and so on. So there are some exercises and all of that. But when you look at exercises here, I'll just scroll it to where I want it to be. I can't find it now. But what they do here is, okay, so what you will see, so they say here, for example, use Dr. Seuss series, or use some sort of particular text, use books with rhymes and books with that are about opposites, right? Books about word classifications, books about animals. What does this say to you? It's like if you fat, do lots of sit-ups. If your legs are weak, do lots of squats, right? It's just a nonsense. They basically treat that process of developing literacy skills as exercises, which is a very American way to actually approach learning. And a lot of information, make up silly words, read riddle books. So, right, so a lot of American tradition in Australian schools will be about that. It's about engaging children in particular games which are believed that they work. But where is communication here? Where's communication here? It's completely lost. We're not doing exercises. Exercises. So what happened to the right brain, hemisphere? Nothing. We're just, we're doing the left-hand hemisphere. So we just basically, if you don't have anything in the left hemisphere, exercise the left hemisphere. What does that mean? If you don't have a particular organ, how can you exercise it? You can see there are problems, just simple logical problems with that logic. So what I will be driving through the next remaining weeks we have is with you the idea, but we do not teach literacy. We teach children to use abstract systems in order to communicate or engage with other people effectively. So children already know how to communicate. Now, because they grow up, they need to now join the adult life, and adult life is no longer just oral. We're no longer living in a culture which only tells stories. We actually write stories, and we don't only write stories, we do lots of things. So now they are expanding their engagements. So they learn they're expanding engagements. They are not learning mathematical systems of ABCD. So basically, all the activities that I will be teaching you how to create activities for learning for teaching literacy to students and for students learning to be literate people, they will be always embedded in, driven by communicative purposes of children. Their purpose, how they actually, they will be driven by students wanting to engage in a society, not wanting to learn ABCD because they are told, but actually all units of work that we will be creating for our students will begin with an attempt of inspiring children or making children want to engage their talents to do things for each other, for the community, to be in the world, right? So they don't read for reading's sake because such a thing doesn't exist. What they will be learning is actually how to do things more effectively, how to do things that they've been doing so far, which is communicate more effectively and with a variety of tools in order to actually get a better outcome. So there we go. So you can read through the rest of the stuff. This particular description here I took from the paper by Sven Silbern, and he's doing this paper, that has produced this paper for a book I'm editing and publishing. I'm editing with Peter Kell and another professor from actually Malaysia. So Sven Silbern is actually from the Center for here Early Childhood Development in Menzies in CDU. And basically what he's saying here is he's basically summarizing on this in this paper, in this fragment here, what everybody now in literacy knows, which is by the age of 3, children will have maximum amount of neurons they will ever have in their lives, ever. Billions upon billions upon billions. Their head is full of potential. So we've discussed in I think the last lesson, or I can't remember, the objections I had against direct instruction, and one of them of course is, if we have children with so much brain capacity, why give them simple things? We in Western culture, not in every culture, but in Western culture, we tend to actually treat children as if they were disabled. Oh my goodness, how can you do it? How could you ever do it? Right? We start little by little, step by step. I mean, we have no idea whether these steps are actually the steps to do. It's all just made up by our traditions because we have no idea about learning, right? So we say we start with simple. We call it even basics. How do we know they're basics? Well, because everybody else calls some things basics. So yeah, that's pretty good, right? We function by rumor, by myths. But the point I really wanted to drive home today is kids have so much brain to use. Well, why not use it? I mean, we very often think that those kids on X Factor that produce wonderful music and so on, they must be geniuses. They're not geniuses. Someone actually gave them attention. So now when you actually will browse further through this PowerPoint, and you will see those 3 definitions of learning, they're not the 3 different definitions, because they're not 3 different definitions of learning. They're definitions that actually address the concerns of these general capabilities from the Australian National Curriculum. So I developed them in the paper with Amy Cash, who teaches in the primary school in Parap, and she finished Master of Education International in our School of Education. So we produced this paper on the basis of her research, and I was her mentor. I've mentored her for 1.5 years and continue. So, even though she's graduated by now. So basically, these are not 3 different definitions of learning. They are basically they're always at the bottom of each, or at the basis of each of these definitions, is the understanding that learning is about dialogic engagement, students' dialogic engagement in a society. It's always dialogic, which is brain cells in students' heads continuously evaluate, analyze, assemble things, reassemble things, evaluate, reevaluate, organize, reorganize. This internal dialogue is happening all the time. But each of these definitions basically addresses a different aspect of the capabilities. But when you actually look at them in detail, and I will not do it with you today because you can read it for yourselves, but you can see in the personal and social capabilities, what we're talking about here, that children develop the understanding of what they can do and who they are quite early, but how they do, what they think of themselves and of their own capacities depends on the extent to which their interpretations of the world are engaged. Oh my goodness. Why am I saying that? Okay, so this is from the research. I mean, this is from research of many people over decades. But, I'm not going to quote here the last 50 years of research. You can just look at neuroscientists today, like this person here, and you can look it up yourselves. And they talk about it. So students' own interpretation must be engaged. How do you do it? Typically, it's the teacher. The teacher says, I'll ask them questions. And I think, whoa, what makes your question right? And in any case, when I ask my students in ELA200, when I ask them questions, they don't want to answer them, they hide. So on campus, like when we ran this particular unit on campus in semester 1, I come to classroom and I say, I'll do to you what you do to students. We will now brainstorm. And they look at me terrified, right? Well, I said, well, you do it to 6-year-olds. Why can't I do it to you? Now everybody is now eager and ready to brainstorm. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, right? We're all awake, right? No, they're not awake. So why is the 5-year-old awake? So all of this is interesting. So anyway, so I'll just check here who's online today. Nobody. So I'll just put it down again. All right. So with the learning capacity, with the general capability of personal and social capability, what we have here is to focus on actually on the engagement of students' own interpretation of the world, so that then they can look at themselves and think, oh my God, what does this say to me about me? And also, how am I actually assessing what other people do correctly? What is it that I know? So you need to allow students to actually evaluate their own interpretations, identify those interpretations, maybe even explore. And that's what the other capabilities are talking about. So let's have a look at the ethical and intercultural capability. So we talk in the about in terms of the concept of learning in the ethical and in the cultural capability. We talk about students being able to confront and explore their own resources of their own cultural knowledge, their own resources. Confront and explore their own. How do you do it? Again, by interrogating them. What do they know? Your question will only probe something, but how do you know it's the right one? Discovering limitations, which is all right. They have to discover their limitations. When we probe and continuously ask them questions that we identify as relevant, we discover their limitation in our eyes, but we do not give them tools to discover their own limitations and build on them, and through comparisons and constructs expand. So you can see already that when we were actually looking at the personal and social capabilities and now at the ethical and intercultural capabilities, what is happening that is coming now, becoming relevant, is enabling students to, to generate these dialogic interactions between self and the world, in order to be able to, in order for their interpretations of the world to be engaged, and in order for them to explore limitations in these interpretations, and then also expand through comparisons and contrasts. And now, when you look at the critical and creative capabilities, we talk about children developing informed understandings. But how do you do that? Well, we always talk. I mean, everybody by now knows, but we need to be careful what sources we quote, right? What sources we actually on what sources we base our information. So that's a kind of like a given. Well, okay. So maybe if we actually enable students to connect a lot, enable them to explore across different things, different contexts, maybe this actually will enable them to create increasingly powerful connections. They assemble contrast, assemble different understandings, they compare and contrast, and therefore they develop tools in order to be critically engaged and also creative. Because if we enable them to connect a lot, then they can create because they have tools. If we just give them this means this, and where else have you seen it? They are wonderful. There's nothing there. There's nothing in it. We need to now think how to create, how to enable students to generate those dialogic connections or these dialogic processes in their head so that these dialogic interactions enable them to actually engage their interpretation of the world, then enable them to actually discover what they have, what they still need to learn, and also to do it on a broad basis by connecting a lot of information. So you can see that we will be moving in assignment 2 to we are moving for the purpose of the assignment 2 towards a concept which is a learning environment which is exploratory, which enables for individual discoveries as well as discoveries that engage students with the world. So you have both the subjective and the objective. Not separate, there's no such a thing like objective, but you have subjective and social continuously in interaction. So individualized and yet connected to the world. And I think this is pretty much what I wanted to do today. I wanted you to see that the reason why I created this whole PowerPoint is for you to actually see it. The ways in which we will be creating our units of work have to build on students' knowledge that language is for communication. So we are not teaching them reading and writing. What we do, we help them expand, we help them to become increasingly effective in the communication. So they learn that they can do things in more than one way. Before they were just telling the story, maybe they will actually do other things with stories. Before they could point, now they could describe maybe using different tools of literacy or different tools of written language. So it's all about communication, not about a mathematical system of reading and writing. And here it is about exploration. So students, in order to actually learn how to be effective communicator, they need to have access to conditions that enable them to explore the world and relate it to themselves. And so raise question and answer them for themselves. They raise the question and they answer them to themselves. Your role as teachers is useful and will be there somewhere, but it cannot be overpowering. It cannot actually remove children's questions out of the game. Priority is for children to actually raise questions which are relevant to them and answer those questions on their own terms. Because learning is nothing else as being able to actually put things together in your head. You do not put things into students' head or inside of you don't reorganize them in students' heads. Students have to actually put things together in their own head. That's what learning is. Everybody wants a definition of learning. It is putting things together, arranging things in your own head. That's what learning is. Arranging and rearranging. There's a definition of learning. It's as good as any other. Probably more important than any other because it actually says you do it. Someone else might dye your hair, but nobody else will actually arrange things in your head. You do it. So I want you to have a look at these things here. So I'm just about finished. I want you to look here, read them a little bit, get excited about them. see what I put here for you and learn about, watch this video. So this is how you watch. You put your cursor on the black and then you play it like by clicking this thing, right? So there you go, you can watch more. So anyway, enjoy the PowerPoint, and I wanted to make these points here, and I'll just show you. This will be another day, right? All of that, but you don't need to know it today yet. So I just wanted to discuss with you the purpose of this PowerPoint. I hope it actually helps you, and we will build on it for assignment 2. Thank you.